Some dare call it conspiracy.
Welcome to the Some Dare Call It Conspiracy podcast, hosted by Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. After nearly 20 years exploring the world of conspiracy culture, we are taking our guests and listeners on a guided tour of the rabbit hole. Our mission? To discover where the truth lies. Hey initiates! Today, we continue our deep dive tour of one rabbit hole known as the Paul is dead theory. Did Paul McCartney die in a car crash in 1966? And was he replaced by session musician and producer William Shepard, as some have alleged? Let's see.
Okay, Chapter 5. Billy claims that Drive My Car by the Beatles was about one of Paul's premonition nightmares. Again, this raises the question, why was he so bothered about working or finding a replacement? Apparently he's madly in love with Jane Asher at this time. Why isn't he just enjoying the time that he had left? But whatever. The book says, Drive My Car was written after one of Paul's nightmares about a girl alone in the rain, wanting to ride in his car. In the song, he would cheat death by saying, "You drive, I'm not your driver." And so this is all starting to get a bit more serious. Maybe this is how he's going to die, maybe in a car crash. These dreams are starting to sort of really play on his mind. Now, Drive My Car isn't, according to present day Paul McCartney, who might be Billy Shears, isn't about driving a car. Do you want to know what it's really about? Or do you know what it's really about?
It's got to be sex, isn't it? Like making me horny.
Of course, yeah, it's sex. Yeah, it's sex. It's an old blues euphemism for sex. You remember you told me that cheesecake was a blues euphemism for pornography, and
I was looking at actually to verify that. Is it wasn't necessarily pornography. It was strip pin-up girls and things like that. And that was pin-ups of women was cheesecake, and pin-ups of men was beefcake.
Oh, that's where beefcake comes from.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Oh, nice. Oh, I like that. I do like that. So, Billy then claims that the 2001 Paul McCartney album, Driving Rain, is also a reference to Paul's death. And he goes on in the book, in the song From a Lover to a Friend, which is mostly about me needing Linda to go on, to let me love again, I used the driving image by singing, it's as far too easy to ride to sea, and then again, despite too easy ride to sea. Right, okay, fair enough. So he's saying that that song's about Linda. Good for him. The book continues. Here are some Beatles songs about Paul's accident. In Don't Pass Me By, Ringo says, you were in a car crash and you lost your hair, suggesting that he'd lost his head, but also being an inside joke since Paul, in 1966, really was losing his hair. In fact, his baldness gave investigators cause to doubt that it was Paul when they found him. His hair was pushed back and held there, masked with blood, so that all his baldness was shown to the top of his head. His line, when I get older, losing my hair, was a serious concern, but he hid his balding well with a combed forward mop top cover up. And he's fucked up there because that wasn't Paul that wrote that line, was it? That was you. Remember, Billy? Anyway. Showing exactly where Paul blew his mind out with in a car, which is from a Beatles song. The Magical Mystery, the Magical Mystery Tour takes you there. In the movie and the album booklet, we refer to 10 miles north of the Dewsbury Road, and this is Paul's death site. The trip was filmed on the first anniversary of his death, and in the title song, you hear a car skidding and crashing representing both Paul's Aston Martin and our tour bus. And that's a cheat, that is, right? Okay, because it's like, it's the bus. It's clearly the fucking bus. Anyway, they then discuss backmasking. But he says that the Beatles didn't invent this, and we've talked a bit about this, putting messages that are only apparent when you play the record backwards, and the Beatles did this, but they didn't invent it, according to Billy. He says that Edison himself had tried to reverse recordings for fun, and also another person that he feels is very influential of the Beatles that also practiced backmasking. Do you know who this person is? I don't think we mentioned this on our Illuminati one, and it's not Venom.
No, I can't think.
Apparently, Aleister Crowley did it.
Oh,
yeah. This is from the book. Aleister Crowley, for years, listened to the phonograph records reversed in an effort to train himself to think backwards. And I was like, bollocks. Like, you've just made that up, surely. But apparently, no. In his 1913 work, Magic Book 4, Liber 4, he suggests that an adept train himself to think backwards by external means. And one of the methods he specified for this purpose was to listen to the phonograph records reversed. Now, he's taking the piss, isn't he? He doesn't really mean... This is a thing that Crowley did. Crowley trolled the shit out of people and would put stuff in his book as like, if you're fucking stupid enough to do this, then, like, fine. Go for it. So we're now on to chapter 6, and in this particular version, which is Billy's back, chapter 6 is not included. And there's a note. Chapter 6, Let It Be, is loaded with Paul is Dead meaning, as shown in the song's heavy backmasking, but because of its spiritual implications, was pulled from this compilation to be included in the book Beatles Enlightenment. And apparently there was planned to be another book that basically had the bits that are cut out of this book that are more spiritual and essentially fluff and not really important. But hey ho. Chapter 7. Billy says that some clues about him replacing Paul are to be found in lyrics discussing the countryside, right? Because like lyrics such as "Born a poor young country boy" on the Beatles song Mother Nature's Song, or ideas from the Paul McCartney album Ram, well, if you think about it, they weren't really in keeping with Paul's urban upbringing in Liverpool, were they? Like, you know, he's a city lad, isn't he? And Billy explains, "It is in Scotland, in the heart of the country, where the holy people grow. Heart of the country, smell the grass in the meadow. On our farm in the heart of the country, I have what I want. Want a horse? I want a sheep. And I usually want to get me a good night's sleep, living in a home in the heart of the country." Those nice rural lyrics are from Heart of the Country on my Ram album. In reality, Mother Nature's Son is a Lennon-McCartney song, which was written primarily by Paul McCartney and was released by the Beatles on the Beatles' White Album, but it wasn't really inspired by Scotland or anything like that. It was inspired by a lecture given by the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi whilst the Beatles were in India. But maybe that's just a cover. So Paul bought this farmland home in Scotland in 1966, and he moved there semi-permanently. And in 1969, there's when he moved there semi-permanently, and he recorded Ram in 1971. Chapter 8. I'd been in a few bands that never made it commercially. I sang and played with hopes of the big time. I also participated in some groups more for fun than profit. Making music has always been fun for me. Most of the time, I worked as a session musician, and that was my Paul training. And Yeah, fair enough. You know, they're like session musicians are incredibly skilled, like absolutely just awesome. I've got a friend that's a guitar player, like of the standard of a session player. He's just he's astonishing. He makes that bit of wood sing. But anyway, Billy says that when he became Paul McCartney, it was brilliant for him because it gave him the opportunity to interact with all sorts of famous musicians and to, in his own words, crash any recording session that I wanted. But cleverly, he used this time to sort of absorb musical tricks and techniques from them, which is why you saw a sort of significant improvement in Paul McCartney's skill level after the original Paul McCartney died. But he also, according to Billy, saw that so much of the music industry was fake. And he said that a lot of the artists that you see, and he's too discreet to name names, obviously, but they're just male models, essentially. And it's session musicians that do all the music, and that essentially the entire music industry is fake. And it is this time that it is revealed who Billy Shepherd is or was. As Billy Pepper in Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots, I covered one Beatles song for each side of an album, followed mostly by my songs. A friend, Jimmy Fraser, wrote 2 songs, one for each side. I called it Mersey Mania. I was living and making a living as Bill Shepherd. I never made it big, but I loved what I was doing, and I never lost the dream of someday hitting the big time. So did you spot the massive clue? The massive clue as to why this person is obviously the replacement of Paul McCartney.
Because he was in a cover band?
Yeah, well, kind of, but because he called himself Billy Pepper. This, you must remember, is before Sergeant Pepper's. And so Sergeant Pepper is Billy Pepper. It proves it, Brent. That's the big clue. So, Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots. This is a genuine band. They were a British studio group created in 1963 by Pickwick International. And it's essentially one of these like cash-in on the Mersey sound that was like really popular. And also, you know, it's a cheap knockoff of the Beatlemania craze, essentially. So the group is best known for low-budget cash-in albums that featured a mix of Beatles covers and original songs written in a similar style. So they were formed, organised by Bill Shepherd, our hero of the piece, Billy, who's an orchestral composer and a future producer for the Bee Gees. Put a pin in that. And also another artist called Jimmy Fraser. The group also released material under the name The Liverpool Beats, which is obviously a reference to Beatles. Now, whilst primarily a studio creation, rumours have persisted that I would say, can you guess who might have been in Billy Pepper's and the Pepper Pots? But you'll never guess it because it's too ridiculous.
Sting.
No, but not bad. It was Lou Reed and John Cale who went on to form the Velvet Underground.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Now, okay. It's a bit of a rumor that they basically were sort of like, but they were in-house staff songwriters for Pickwick Records, which is the label behind the Pepper Pots, and they worked there at the time that the Pepper Pots were were doing this, and their jobs were to churn out knockoff songs and sound-alike recordings of like current hits, so it is plausible that Reed and John Cale may have been involved in the sessions, but the most frequently cited piece of evidence is that a photo on the cover of the group's album, The Liverpool Beats, there's a guy there that looks very much like a young Lou Reed. And so it's entirely possible, basically. So anyway, the group released 2 albums during the British invasion. In 1963, Mersey Mania, which featured Beatles covers I Want to Hold Your Hand and I Saw Her Standing There. And then in 1964, Beat, More Mersey Mania, which included covers such as She Loves You and Please Please Me, along with original tracks like Night Without End and Baby You Can Do No Wrong. So, back to Billy in the book. I referred to these albums when Brian interviewed me for the Paul position. The albums did not make any meaningful money for me directly, but it did help impress the person who mattered more than a fan base. My role as Billy Pepper made a good impression on Brian Epstein, who considered the plausibility of having me fill Paul's shoes. That is figurative, of course. In reality, his shoes were too small, so I would have to, and he quotes from the lyrics from Flaming Pie, cut my toes off to spite my feet. You see, there's so many more. Yeah, all of these lyrics, they're not about the stuff that you thought they were about, that they're apparently about. No, they're all sort of oblique references to things that only Billy would know. Anyway.
I like how he's saying he's a better musician than him. He's got a bigger head than him, and he's definitely got a bigger cock.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what I took away from it as well. Like, but he goes on to say, when I did my session work, I would play a tuba one day, then a piano or a clarinet the next, whatever instrument was needed. So he's a multi-instrumentalist. Clients would often use me as a backup vocals. In a pinch, they appreciated my talent in voice matching. They would play a tape recording of a voice for me to imitate, and I would have it quickly by singing along, and then would keep it for the rest of the recording session. The average listener would assume that the guy credited on the album cover was in fact the man that they were hearing. And that is where I was known as the man with 1,000 voices. And then he clarifies, in case you are wondering, Brett, I didn't really have 1,000 voices, but that was my reputation. Thanks for that, Billy. Now, it's just struck me, okay, that like, it very much sounds like we're having a go at Billy Shepherd, the actual Billy Shepherd. And of course, we're not having a go at Billy Shepherd. Salute to Billy Shepherd, the real Billy Shepherd. We're having a go at this obviously made up fraudulent version of Billy Shepherd. Because in reality, Billy Shepherd has a son, which again, in many ways undermines this entire theory. You see, as his son has written, Gary Shepherd. Billy and the Pepper Pots was an exploitation album by my father to cash in on Mersey Mania. The band never existed outside of the studio. Songs credited to my father, Bill Shepherd, were pastiche Beatles copies. My father went on to produce early Bee Gees songs in Australia and then went back to England and became their main arranger and orchestrator for their early big hits. He was about 5 foot 8 inches tall and was not Paul McCartney's replacement. When people keep producing this Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots albums, and there were 2, and they were pretty awful, as if this is evidence of a replacement for Paul, it clearly shows up the lack of any proof that you have to question all the other evidence stated as facts. I know that Billy Shepherd was not the replacement Beatle, so don't keep bringing these very poor cash-in albums and a non-existent band as part of the evidence. Bill Shepherd and Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots not being part of the Paul conspiracy is a fact, as his family all know. Whether the Beatles knew about Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots and used it for the Sgt. Pepper name as an ironic joke, we will never know. And so that's Gary Shepherd, the son of Bill Shepherd.
Well, to be fair, he's saying things that only someone there
would know. Exactly. This is it. But there are things that people that weren't there would also know. For example, To Whom It May Concern is the 10th album by the Bee Gees, and this was released in October 1972. And it's the follow-up, and it continues the melancholic and personal sound of its predecessor, Trafalgar. And the album was recognized as a farewell to the old Bee Gees, as an album that marked the end of an era for a group in several ways. It was their last album to be recorded solely at IBC Studios in London, and it was their last with their conductor and arranger, Bill Shepherd, who had guided the Bee Gees since 1967. So Bill Shepherd, born in 1927, died in November 1988, was an English musician and composer born in Mersham, Surrey. He became known for his mid-1960s work in Australia to reinvent the music presentation of the Bee Gees. Bill encouraged the brothers to abandon a variety act show presentation in favor of the music talents of the brothers. Bill used his talents as an arranger and a musical director to guide the Bee Gees in the early 1970s. Bill sadly passed away in Los Angeles in 1988. So he was a producer and a musical director and an arranger for the Bee Gees, and his notable credits include the albums The Bee Gees Sing and Play 14 Barry Gibb Songs, which came out in 1965. Shepherd was the producer for this debut album, which included their first Australian charting single, Wine and Women. The Bee Gees' first, which came out in 1967, he was credited with as orchestral arranger for the group's first international album, which featured hits like New York Mining Disaster 1941 and Holiday. And the aforementioned To Whom It May Concern in 1972. Shepherd provided the orchestral arrangements for this album. He's also involved in the production and arrangements for numerous early Bee Gees songs, including Wine and Women, You Wouldn't Know, I Was a Lover and Leader of the Man, and The Children Laughing, I Don't Think It's Funny, Follow the Wind, Claustrophobia, Don't Say Goodbye, Run to Me, Lonely Days. So Bill Shepherd was considered significant and almost a full-time member of the group in everything but name. That's according to the Bee Gees themselves. During this period, he would shape their sound from small string ensembles to 30-piece orchestras and encouraging their focus on songwriting. So you would think that people might notice if he looked like Paul McCartney. Now, here, and let me see if I can put this in the chat. Now is the time for everybody to go to the website somedarecallitconspiracy.com and to have a look at picture number 3. And this is a picture of what Bill Shepherd, the man who replaced Paul McCartney, looked like in 1965. Have you got this on your phone, or do I need to send it to you? So you've got it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm looking at someone who looks a lot more like Joe Pesci or someone like that.
No, he looks like Paul Sorvino. He looks like Paulie from Goodfellas, doesn't he?
Right. Yeah. This is what I'm thinking. I was thinking something like Goodfellas. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, he looks like Mira Sorvino's father, the actor Paul Sorvino. He's got, but this is the person that apparently replaces Paul McCartney. And it will go on to explain this in the book, but he did need... Okay.
But I need to I need to stop here because I'm getting confused as fuck. Billy Shears, Bill Shepherd, and Paul McCartney. What? Who's who right now?
Well, at the moment, Paul McCartney is still alive. Okay, he's not actually died, or he's just died in this car crash, although we've not found the details of it. He had a premonition. He knew that he was going to die in 1966, and so he felt the need to be looking for this person. But at the same time, mysteriously, his spirit was sort of going into this person and infecting his dreams. So he kind of knew what was going down as well.
And who is this? Bill Shears or Shepherd?
Well, Bill Shears, okay, is a nickname. It's a reference to sheep, essentially, Bill Shears. And this will be explained later. It comes from in the introduction to Get By With a Little Help From My Friends, the one and only Billy Shears on the Sgt. Pepper's advert. And so that was a coded way that they said that actually this is Billy Shepherd, because you shear sheep, and he is the shepherd who shears the sheep.
Oh my God. I'm sure I was not the only person confused at this point.
It will all be explained as it goes along. This is the problem with the book. It is very, very sort of convoluted. You have to sort of read a lot.
And this picture is Billy Shepherd, the Bee Gees producer.
Of Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots. That photo was taken in the mid-60s, apparently 1965. So this would be a year before he took over the role of Paul McCartney. Now, spoilers, he will have to have extensive plastic surgery in order to make him look like Paul McCartney, and also other, shall we say, interventions, because he's right-handed. And Paul McCartney is famously left-handed. This will all be discussed and explained with I'd say evidence, but it'll all be explained and discussed by the book as we go on. So that's who he is, essentially. But so this is the reveal. The man who replaced Paul McCartney, according to the book and according to the theory, is Billy Shepherd of Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots, who looks quite a lot like Paul Sorvino. Yeah. So, yeah. Also, by the way, if you're on the website and you're having a look at this big Paul Sorvino looking guy and you feel like you'd like to go and check out our Patreon, please feel free. So, yeah, that's...
follow us on social media.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So anyway, when I first joined the Beatles, and this is Billy talking in the book, I imitated Paul. Owing to his scratchy, worn-out voice quality, it is easy to imitate, but harsh on the throat. When it was time to record, I went with a clearer sound and varied my voice for each song for effect. You can hear John and me use a variety of voices in You Know My Name. I use my Vivian voice for enough of that. I expected to be recognised as a match with how I sing as Vivian Stanshall on the strip stage in the Magical Mystery Tour film. As I sing in A Fool on the Hill, I am the man of 1,000 voices, talking perfectly loud, but nobody ever hears him. I played as Viv until the mid-90s. Because of course you fucking would. So what we're supposed to believe, right, is the guy in that photo that you're now looking at on the website that looks very much like Paul Sorvino, who became the replacement for Paul McCartney from 1962, so 3 years prior to the taking of that photo, until the 90s, also played the role of Vivian Stanshall from the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band. Because of course you fucking would, wouldn't you? Because, you know, if you're trying to pull off one massive fraud against the public, which apparently has to be kept secret on pain of death, even to this day, why wouldn't you risk it all and the lives of everyone who's involved in it by pissing around as a member of the fucking Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, who interacted with such members of Monty Python on a TV show called Don't Adjust Your Set, which ran for 29 episodes and is now available on DVD? Wouldn't that be injudicious? So, the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band famously appeared in the Beatles' 1967 film, The Magical Mystery Tour. They performed the song Death Cab for Cutie during a striptease sequence at the Raymond Revenue Bar in London's Soho. The performance accompanied stripper Jan Carson and was watched by members of the Beatles, most notably John Lennon and George Harrison. So the song, Death Cab for Cutie, was written by Vivian Stanshall and Neil Innes. It's a parody of 1950s teenage tragedy songs, and it's also where the band Death Cab for Cutie got its name from. So this film was filmed on September the 18th, 1967. And later, Paul McCartney produced the band's only hit single, I'm the Urban Spaceman. And he produced it under the pseudonym Apollo C. Vermouth. Now, Neil Innes, do you know who Neil Innes is from the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band?
No.
He went on to do The Ruttles, which is a Eric Idle parody. He's got Michael Palin in it as well. It's a parody of the Beatles where they are the prefab for Dirk, Stig, Nasty, and Barry, who are legends in their own lifetime. Okay. And they're essentially, it's brilliant. It's so funny. It's like everyone should go and watch the Ruttles right now. So anyway, here we go. Having the right appearance is all that matters. When I look like Paul, fans hear him. If I look like another, that's who people hear. Even in Viv's case, when it's obvious that the hair, the mustache, the teeth, the nose, and the ears are all not real, it does not matter. People will still only hear what they believe and see. My Vivian costumes were a running gag with beards and foam latex. The fixed blindness of fans made it easy for me to play as Paul once my looks were close enough. Looks are also subject to environment. Being on album covers as Paul, the Beatles' context proved I was him. Since my role as the Fool, Vivian Stanshall was my most successful gig other than Paul. It is also one that is easy to find online. As Viv in the Magical Mystery Tour, I look exactly like my son James McCartney does now. If you compare images of James and Vivian, you will see that my son looks exactly like me. And he's fucked right up there. Have you spotted it? We know what Billy Shepherd looks like. In order to play Vivian Stanshall, which he's been doing since 1962, you've just said you have fake nose, fake ears, latex. It's a latex mask. So why would Paul McCartney's son look like the latex mask? It wouldn't work. It wouldn't work because he doesn't look like Vivian. So claiming that he is Vivian because Vivian looks like Paul McCartney's kids is a bit of a fucking non-starter. Okay. So if you go to the website, some dare call it conspiracy.com, you can see in the Paul McCartney section a picture of Paul McCartney's son. And
oh, wow.
Then, yeah. And
he looks like Paul McCartney, doesn't he?
He looks very much like Paul McCartney. You can then see a picture.
That core bit, isn't it? That core bit right in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you can see a picture of Vivian Stanshall. Now, again, it's a bit moot because that's not what he looks like. That's a mask.
But, I mean, it does look masky. But it looks like it's a screenshot from a paused video, doesn't it? So
it is like and later he did have a sort of like slightly longer walrus mustache, and as his hair recedes, he does have a bit more of a sort of larger forehead, like Paul McCartney's son. But we'll talk about that. We will come on to that in a bit. Don't think we're just skating over this. But to me, those two don't look particularly alike. He looks more like Paul McCartney. And also, as we've stated, he should look like Paul Sorvino. He shouldn't look like Vivian Stanshall because Vivian Stanshall doesn't look like Vivian Stanshall. It's a mask. So claiming that Vivian Stanshall is obviously Paul McCartney because his kids look like it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. The conspiracy crowd, however, think that this is completely plausible. So just going back to that video with Mark and Mike. Mark Devlin, well, I must admit I had a few problems with the Vivian Stanshall claims to start with because I looked at old pictures of Vivian and I didn't see any resemblance whatsoever between what purports to be Vivian Stanshall and Paul, Billy as Paul. I just couldn't see it. But I suppose you kind of just have to go along with what he's telling you in the book. It's interesting, though, that James McCartney, so-called Billy's son, does look a fair bit like pictures that we see of Vivian Stanshall. And I think the story is that Billy is not a natural dark-haired guy. He's got sort of sandy light-coloured hair, and that's been passed on to his son James. So there's a little clue as to what he might look like outside of his poor guys there, maybe. We know what he fucking looks like. There's a picture of him. He looks like an Italian gangster. Right, and then they keep showing Vivian Stanshall next to McCartney's son in this video with Mark and Mike, and saying that they look similar. But again, it doesn't make sense because apparently Stanshall's face was a mask. So Mark goes on to say, yeah, with Vivian Stanshall, what we have to understand is the massive surgeries that Bill Shepherd had in order to make the transformation from William Shepherd as he looked when he was Bill Shepherd to that time when he was Paul McCartney. In the book, he says that these surgeries were extensive, that fillers were used, also that they used latex with regard to the whole Vivian Stanshall bit. Right, so here's an interesting point, right? Why doesn't Vivian Stanshall's face change significantly after the person that's wearing the mask has extensive facial surgery? Like, it's ridiculous. Like, why, if he started being Vivian in 1962 and was why did he have to have surgery to look like Paul in 1966? Why didn't they use similar latex type masks? Why doesn't Vivian's appearance change significantly after 66? None of it makes any sense. Mark has an explanation. But even if you look at Vivian Stanshall, the transformation or the change in Stanshall's appearance is very significant over time. And people didn't pick up on that either. So I actually have a slide and I've shown it around to folks. And I say, well, take a look. Here's Vivian Stanshall before all of his surgery. And take a look at him. And then when you see him in the latter part as the surgery stages, he starts to look, his facial features look very much like Paul McCartney, especially when we take a look at Paul McCartney, you know, during the 1967, 68 period. So I understand your point, Mark, where it's a struggle sometimes to take a look at Vivian or Shepherd playing Stanshall and say, really? Is that really him? I don't know. I mean, it doesn't look like him, but we have to understand that surgeries, they weren't facelifts. Think of this as a total reconstruction of someone's face. That's how to view it. This guy went through extensive surgeries, but then I had to say, look, he's telling us that he not only had extensive surgery, this wasn't a nip and a tuck there, this was creating a whole new face. So it's really weird to most people, but that is apparently what happened. And later in the same video said, Vivian Stanshall is said to be the voice that introduces the instruments on Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells album in this sort of posh, upper-class English voice. So we know, and obviously that doesn't sound like Paul McCartney, but that's a clue. The fact that he doesn't sound like Paul McCartney is a clue that he probably is Paul McCartney, because maybe it was Billy Shears doing a spot of voice acting. If it really was Vivian Stanshall, or maybe it was just the name that was used. I guess we don't know, but it's an interesting possibility. It's like I said, you're the voice of Stanshall, especially when he does some of his readings and stuff like that. You're going to listen to it and say, that doesn't sound like Paul McCartney at all. But again, he's in character at that time. He's in character as Vivian Stanshall. He's the character that he plays, just like when he's playing Paul McCartney. And he tells you in the book that he's the man of 1,000 voices, that he has the keen ability to speak in different voices, to sing and impersonate other singers. So from that perspective, if we're to take that as truth, if he's telling us the truth about that he has this skill and ability, then it is very possible that he is doing these things. So the explanation for why none of this hangs together and why Vivian Stanshall doesn't sound a bit like Paul McCartney is that they're all the same bloke who is really good at doing lots of different voices. Right. They then, and this is in the Mike Williams and Mark Devlin thing, they use two pictures that they put side to side together. Okay. And so if you go to www.somedayicallitconspiracy.com and look at picture number 6 in the Paul McCartney file, this is supposedly Vivian Stanshall before and after the surgeries. Okay. If you're on our website and you're feeling generous, please check out our Patreon and please follow us on all social media. So anyway, we can see this picture, and on the left, we've got the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, and Vivian Stanshall's got short hair, a sort of handlebar mustache. And on the right, he's got a lot longer hair and a sort of more sort of billowy, walrusy mustache. He's also wearing glasses. And in that one, people suggest that he looks kind of tiny, maybe a little bit more like Paul McCartney, or maybe a little bit more like Paul McCartney's son. As we would say, though, it's a mask, so that really doesn't happen.
You know who I think he looks like, which is actually quite funny? Vivian looks like Vivian, Aid Edmondson.
From the young ones, yes, he does actually, yeah. Fantastic. Maybe, well, shit. This goes even deeper than we thought.
See, we could be better conspiracy theorists.
He's now playing Adrian Edmondson as well, and that's why they had to off Rick Mail, because he found out about it. Ooh.
There you go. Boom.
Wow. Now look at the two pictures, right? Okay, and there's something that they've failed to notice. Like, to be quite honest,
makeup.
They've both, well, pick any member of the band. Pick any member of the band and look at them in one of the photos and then look at them in the other photos. Right?
They look a little bit older and dressed a little bit different,
yeah.
But also they have all got like sort of clown makeup on or white makeup on.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But there's a bit of a problem that they've got with this, because they're trying to show the sort of the progression essentially. And as I say, the reason that you could look at all of the band members and basically say, look, they've all changed, because these two pictures were taken a year apart. But there is a problem with how Mike is presenting this, because what he's saying is like, look, this is what he looked like before the surgery when he was playing Vivian Stanshall, and this is what he's looking like after the surgery when he's playing Vivian Stanshall. And the surgeries obviously took place starting in 1966. The photo on the left was taken in January 1968. The photo on the right was taken in the winter of 1969. Okay, so both of these pictures were taken supposedly after the surgeries have taken place, which somewhat undermines that particular theory. And Mike himself in this video admits, look, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm just doing this by looking at this stuff. And that got right on my nerves. That is,
no, it did.
that's the worst type of fucking research that anyone can do, right? Okay, basically, like, I'm not an expert, right? Okay, but I've looked at this and I think there's something odd about it. Cool, great, good. Find out if there is something odd about it. That is not the finish point. That's what pisses me off about all this, like, crisis actors shit and everything that people do is like, I think that looks like this, right? Okay, we'll find out if it fucking does, okay? But hey ho. Now, Mark Devlin has the theory basically, and he says that the fact that Paul McCartney / Billy isn't in jail for fraud, it proves that not only is this whole thing real, but that it must go to the very highest levels of government. And maybe even to the Illuminati itself. Because if you think about it, what Mark says is, if you extend that and you think that, think about whether anyone from the regular walk of life, if they were to assume the identity of a dead person and trade as that for years, if they were ever found out, they'd be facing some serious jail time for fraud. But the fact that this has never happened to Billy indicates that he's got some friends in very high places. And there's full complicity in the likes of the police and the judiciary and the likes of MI5 and MI6. They would simply have to be involved. Probably even the monarchy themselves would know about this, because the Queen has knighted this guy twice. She's got to know who he really is. So this plot, this reaches into all of those establishments, and it could not have succeeded otherwise. I mean, that's one possibility. The other possibility is that the entire thing is made up. Also, right, and I'm sorry about this, Mark, right, okay, but you do this all the fucking time. He's got an obsession with saying that anyone that's received any honor from the Queen is calling it a knighthood. Like, he does this presentation where he claims that Wiley, the godfather of Graham, Wiley, is part of the Illuminati because he was knighted by the Queen. Wiley wasn't knighted by the Queen. Wiley was given an MBE. He actually had to give it back in 2024 for being anti-Semitic. But Mark has got this obsession where he calls any honor, OBE, MBE, anything like that, CVE, he calls it a knighthood, and thinks that it's an indication that that this person is very clearly in the Illuminati, which technically means that Brian Clough was in the Illuminati, which actually, when I say it out loud, could be true.
Hey, thanks for listening to Some Dare Call It Conspiracy with Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. Join us next week for the next installment of our Paul is Dead deep dive series. If you'd like to skip ahead and hear all 14 episodes of the series right now, please consider joining us at www.patreon.com/somedarecallitconspiracy, where you can also listen to over 20 unreleased episodes of our now Patreon exclusive series, The World According to Some, aka Twats. Until next time.